Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the September My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. For this layout, I'm using one of the My Creative Scrapbook cut files that are available to subscribers each month. This one says, I love you this much. I backed the cut file with some pattern papers. Then I cut out another cut file. This time I didn't make the inside cuts. I put some glue on the back of the original cut file, and then I glued this second cut file to the back of it, and this will make the cut file sturdier. I'm able to punch holes and do some stitching on the cut file, and you'll see that in a few moments. Now I'm creating a frame for the layout. I gutted the center of one of the pattern papers that we got in the kit, and then I layered another one of the pattern papers that we got in the kit on top of it. I gutted that piece of paper too, and now I'm attaching the papers together. And I mount both of them on a 12 by 12 inch piece of paper that I know that I'm not going to use for another layout. It's a very old paper. I had to reposition this dark blue piece of paper a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that it was correctly positioned on top of the pattern paper underneath it. So now I'm using a 120-pound piece of cardstock. I've already put some white gesso on top of it, and I'm using a number of sprays in the background. I've already trimmed this piece of paper so that it'll fit nicely into the frame that I made a few moments ago. And I'm using some Tattered Angels Glimmer Mists to make a mixed media background that I'm going to put the cut file on top of. I'm using some Tattered Angels Glimmer Mists. I use the colors Blue Ribbon, Bluebell, and Tropical Water on this layout. I'm using the packaging technique. I'm putting a little bit of the glimmer mist on the packaging and I'm pressing it down against the paper. I continue to repeat this process with all three different colors that I chose. There are three different shades of blue, and I thought that all the shades of blue went well with the pattern papers that I have used to back the cut file. I often put the cut file back on top of the mixed media just to make sure that I like the way the mixed media is looking. I have a photo that I've already chosen and I've backed it with some white cardstock. And then I have a piece of a wreath that I cut into pieces because I use another part on another layout, and I'm going to put that piece on top of the photo. The wreath was one of the ephemera pieces that we got in the kit this month. After I use the packaging technique to add some color to the background in two different areas, the area where the cut file is going to go and the area behind the floral cluster that I cut from the wreath, I added some water droplets to the areas where I put the sprays, and then I rolled some paper towel over the top that lifts up a little bit of the color and it creates kind of a cool effect that I really like. I do that all the time with my mixed media backgrounds. And now I'm trying to clean up a couple of spots that I got on the layout that I wanted to remove. And then I'm adding a second round of splatters of water and then rolling the paper towel over those areas. Now that the sprays are dry, I'm going in with another layer of color. I really like to add more than one layer of color. I like the way building up the color adds some depth to the color. It makes it a little bit darker and a little bit more interesting and more intense. I rolled the paper towel over the layout again. I'm just picking up a little bit of the color. I don't want the darks to get too dark, so the paper towel helps to lift up some of the pooled areas of color. And then I add a few more splatters of the Tattered Angels Glimmer Mists. Usually when I'm adding sprays to the background, I try to start with the lightest color and then work toward the darkest color. I added some more splatters to the background. I rolled the paper towel over it again to lift up some of the color, and now I'm adding another round of the water droplets and again rolling the paper towel over the top to lift up some of the color. When the sprays are a darker color, I find that you can see the impact of adding those droplets of water to the sprays on the background more than if the color on the background is very light. So I added extra splatters because I was noticing that it really did have a nice effect on these blue colors that were in the background. So I did that several times, and I think you could really see it in the finished layout. I wanted to mention that I always make sure that the background is totally dry before I add those droplets of water. If the background sprays are still wet, it will have a totally different effect when the droplets of water are added. So I will use my heat tool, I'll dry the background, and then add those droplets of water. I always try to include the majority of the footage of the mixed media background, even though sometimes it takes a really long time to create these backgrounds, but you can always fast forward because a lot of times the process repeats itself. So I went back in with more sprays using the packaging technique. I really like the idea of using multiple layers of color in order to create a rich and interesting background. I make sure that each layer is dry before adding another layer of color on top. Otherwise, the layers just mix together and it doesn't necessarily make them darker. And you could see that I once again added some more splatters of water and used my paper towel to lift up some of the color. So now I'm happy with the way the background looks, and I'm going to layer the background on top of the pattern papers that I cut to size and layered earlier. I use lots of ATG adhesive on the back of my mixed media background. And then I very carefully position my background on top of the pattern papers. And then once I have it in the right place, I press it down. Next, I want to attach the cut file on top of the sprays that I put on the background. I did some stitching on the cut file. I absolutely love the way stitching looks on cut files. I think it adds so much character and so much texture to it. I used a whole bunch of different shades of green and purple and blue to match the pattern papers. I put the cut file in position, and then I take that part of the wreath that I'm going to put on top of the photo, and I use some Distress Oxide to ink the edges of it. The color that I'm using now is a Distress Oxide color called Villainous Purple, and I think that it's a good match for this collection. I want to mat my photo on some colored cardstock, so I was trying to figure out what color would match best with this collection and would look best on the layout, and I decided on this purple paper that I had in my purple scrap envelope. I put some ATG adhesive on the back of the photo, and then I positioned it right above the cut file, and then I used my T-square just to make sure that it was straight. Next, I attached down the florals that I had cut out of a larger wreath. I think it fits just perfectly above the photo. Now I'm arranging the 49 and Market purple flowers that we got in the kit this month, and I thought that this color went really well with the colors in the pattern paper. I'm just trying to decide where I want to put all of these floral elements. I have a cluster on the left-hand side of the photo and another small cluster I'm building on the lower right-hand side. This pack of flowers not only had some individual larger flowers, it also had some stems that had multiple flowers on them. There were some buds, there were some leaves, so there were a lot of elements to arrange. So I started building another cluster on the right-hand side of the photo, and I'm moving the florals around and just trying to figure out what the best arrangement for all of them would be. The photo that I'm using is of both of my daughters, Danielle and Julia, and this was taken a few years ago when we were in Cape Cod. This was one of our favorite restaurants. Even though it wasn't a fancy restaurant, it had the most delicious Thai food that we have ever tasted, either before or after visiting this place. We absolutely love it, and we hope to go back at some point. I liked the way the layout was turning out, but I just felt it was missing a little something. So I decided to use one of my favorite techniques. I cut out two pieces of paper 3 inches square, and I used some strips of paper that I had from this layout and from other layouts, and I'm layering them on top of those 3-inch squares. Some of these papers are scraps from other layouts, and some of them are branding strips from some of the pattern papers in the kit. Before I attach them down to the 3-inch squares, I ink the edges of all of these strips of paper with some Distress Oxide in peacock feathers. I try to spread out the different colors and the different patterns. I just want to create an interesting square, and then I'm going to cut both of the squares in half. That will give me 4 triangles. I'm going to put a triangle in each corner of my layout, and I hope that that will add a little bit more interest and a finishing touch to the layout. So once I have all of the strips positioned on the square, I trim off all of the excess. And then after I trim off the excess, I'm going to cut this square in half. I want to cut these strips in half going in the opposite direction of the strips. I could also cut them going in the same direction as the strips, but I want to cut through the strips. You could see on the upper right hand corner how I've cut them. So I cut both of the squares in the same way, and then I ink the edges and I place each of those triangles that I've just created in each of the 4 corners. I use Distress Oxide in peacock feathers to ink the edges of all 4 of the triangles, and then I use some ATG adhesive and I attach all of them down. I was really happy with the addition of these triangles. I think that the corners were looking a little bare, and these pattern paper covered triangles were just what the layout needed to look complete. Next, I want to attach down those 49 and Market purple flowers to the layout. To do that, I'm using some heavy gel medium with a matte finish and a very old paintbrush that I use all the time for my scrapbooking layouts. And I'm just adding a little bit of the medium to each of the flowers. It's a really great adhesive, and it pretty much will hold anything down, so it's perfect for dimensional elements like the flowers. Even though I have a good idea of where I want to place everything on the layout, I can't help myself. I still continue to arrange everything and position everything as I glue it down to the layout. I decided to add one of the smaller flowers between the words you and this, and I liked the way that flower brought a little bit of the purple to that section of the cut file. If you have been watching my videos for a while, you will not be surprised that I wanted to add photo corners to my photo. I use my EK Success photo corner punch and some pattern paper from the kit, and I punched out 4 blue photo corners. I used the peacock feathers Distress Oxide once again to ink the edges, and then I used some ATG adhesive and I attached those photo corners down to the photo. I wanted to add a little touch of white to each of the purple flowers, so I used some Finnabair heavy gesso, and I'm using an old paintbrush and just dabbing a little bit of the gesso onto each of the flowers. My video camera ran out of batteries, so it stopped recording, but you could see here that I added a touch of white to the edges of all the petals. We got a pack of laser cut pieces in our kit this month, and I loved this beautiful lace, so I thought that I would add a piece of it underneath the cut file. I cut it to size, I inked the edges, I put some adhesive on the back, and then I tucked it underneath the cut file. So next I wanted to add another detail to those triangles. I used a ruler and a pencil, and I drew a line on each of the triangles. Then I used my paper piercer and I punched holes along each of those lines. I had to punch through a number of layers of paper, so it was a little tricky in some spots to push the paper piercer all the way through, but it wasn't too hard. I was able to punch holes, and my plan is to stitch along each of those lines. Before I do that, I wanted to add a few more leaves to the layout, so I'm using my dauber that has green on it, and I'm inking the edges of each of these flowers, and I'm adding them to each of those 3 flower clusters. Since there were still a couple more of those buds and other elements for the flowers, I thought that I would add those to the clusters as well. I use my Fisker scissors and I cut those wire pieces and those buds down to size, and I'm using them to fill out each of those clusters. It just makes them a little fuller, and then it adds a little more interest to each of them as well. I love to add different materials to the layout, so I like the idea of having some wire, and I love the way they're formed into spirals. So I cut them into a number of pieces and I tucked them into several of the clusters. And even though I thought that these were going to be the finishing touches, I was looking at the top of the layout and I was thinking that I should add a little something above the photo. I decided to use this sentiment that says together. I inked the edges. I also cut a mat out of some teal paper, and then I attached the word together to the mat. I liked the way that it looked over the photo, but I was thinking that it would look even better popped up on some foam. So I cut a piece of fun foam to size and I attached it down to the layout. I almost forgot to mention that now you could see that I've completed the stitching on each of the triangles. I used 4 different colors of embroidery floss, and those are the same colors that I used on the cut file. I wanted to add some finishing touches with some colored pearls, so I picked out a number of pearls from my stash that I thought match with the colors in this collection, and I'm using a different color in each of the corners of the photo to embellish those photo corners that I attached earlier. I wanted to add a few more pearls to the layout. I add them on either side of the word together, and that is the final touch, and the layout is complete, and here are the close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. I really hope that you enjoyed watching it. Please take a look in the description box to find the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website, where you can check out all of the beautiful kits that they have available this month. And if you would like to purchase a subscription, you can do that there. I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and I will see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.